Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever felt, just overwhelmed by information, wishing there was a quicker way to really grasp something deep? Well, today we're diving into exactly that kind of topic. Spiritual authority and obedience. It sounds foundational, and it is, but it's often really misunderstood. And our source material for this deep dive is pretty unique. It's a series of messages originally in Chinese from way back in 1948, translated from notes. So you get this blend of ancient wisdom, scriptural depth, and a really fascinating perspective on what authority truly means, where it comes from, and how we respond to it. Well, it shapes basically everything.
Indeed. And our mission today really is to pull out the key insights from this rich material. We'll look at why God's authority is considered paramount. We'll also explore how rebellion, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly, shows up in our lives. And crucially, what qualities are needed, both for those under authority and those who are entrusted with it. You should come away with a clearer picture of how these principles work, not just spiritually, but, in society, families, everywhere.
Yeah, expect some aha moments, maybe some surprising connections that'll help you get a handle on this vital topic quickly but thoroughly. Ready to jump in? Okay, so the source starts big, right? It says God's throne itself is built on his authority, not just his power. That feels like a key distinction. What's the real difference there? Why emphasize that?
It really is fundamental. Think of it like this. God's acts, his power, they come from his throne. But the throne itself, its very foundation, is his authority. The Bible talks about God upholding things by the word of his power, and our source clarifies this really means the word stemming from his authority. So power is what God does, but authority is essentially who God is in his governance.
Ah, okay.
And that's why sinning against power might be, relatively speaking, more easily forgiven than sinning against authority, because the challenging authority is like challenging God himself at his core.
Wow. That definitely raises the stakes. If authority is that fundamental to God, what happens when it gets challenged? Where does that lead?
Well, this takes us straight to the origin of evil, according to the source. Satan's fall. It wasn't just a sin like stealing something. It was fundamentally rebellion against authority. This principle of self-exaltation, trying to put his own throne, his own will above God's.
So if that's the ultimate rebellion, what's the flip side? What's the greatest thing God actually asks from us in response to his authority? Is it sacrifice? Service?
It's interesting you mention those. The source makes a bold claim. The greatest demand isn't bearing the cross, or serving, or offerings, or even self-denial, though those are important. The absolute highest demand is simply to obey.
Just obey.
Yeah. Look at King Saul. He spared the best sheep and oxen of the Amalekites, right? His reasoning. Oh, they're for sacrifice to God. Sounds good, doesn't it?
Uh-huh. Sounds pious almost.
But Samuel's response cuts right through it. Behold, obedience is better than sacrifice. Even in sacrifice, you see, there can be self-will. I'll sacrifice this way, these animals. But obedience, pure obedience, that alone truly honors God because it takes his will, not ours, as the absolute center.
That's a powerful contrast. The motives and the source of the action matter immensely. And the ultimate example of this kind of obedience, the source, points to Jesus in Gethsemane, right? But maybe not in the way we usually think about it.
Exactly. Many focus on the fear, the agony.
Yeah.
And the suffering was real, absolutely. But the source suggests the core struggle wasn't just fear of the cup itself. His deepest prayer, his earnest plea, was to be absolutely sure of God's will. Not as I will, but as thou wilt.
Yeah.
The cup wasn't the absolute, God's will was.
Ah, okay.
So his crucifixion wasn't just a sacrifice. It was the ultimate act of obedience to the Father's specific will. It fulfilled God's authoritative plan. And the implication for us is huge. Knowing God's will and obeying it is being subject to authority. But, how can we be subject if we aren't actively seeking his will in the first place?
Right. That makes sense. So if obedience is the goal, where did things first go off track for humanity? Let's look at some of those Old Testament examples the source uses, starting right at the beginning with Adam and Eve.
Yeah, the fall in Genesis, it wasn't just about, casually eating a piece of fruit. The core issue, as the source presents it, was God putting Adam under authority, precisely so he could learn obedience. But Eve, instead of submitting to either God's direct command or Adam's representative headship, she made her own call. Based on what? What she saw was good for food, a delight to the eyes, desirable to make one wise.
Her own judgment, essentially.
Exactly. Her own reasoning trumped God's clear word and the authority structure. It was choosing self-determined knowledge of good and evil over letting God define right and wrong for them. That's where the rebellion started.
That idea of choosing our own knowledge of good and evil is, well, it's everywhere, isn't it? Now, what about rebellion against delegated authority,
Yeah.
people God puts in charge. The story of Ham and Noah comes up.
Right, Noah's son Ham.
Really?
After the flood, Noah gets drunk, uncovered in his tent. Not great conduct, obviously.
Yeah.
But Ham sees his father's nakedness, and what does he do? He goes and tells his two brethren without. He broadcasts it. The source emphasizes that Ham failed to see the dignity of authority. His action wasn't just reporting, it revealed a rebellious spirit, because he seemed to almost delight in seeing a flaw in authority and then exposing it, rather than covering it respectfully like Shem and Japheth did.
So the issue wasn't Noah's failure, but Ham's reaction to the failure.
Precisely. It shows that our response, even to flawed authority, reveals our spirit. Do we respect the position, the office, or do we jump at the chance to expose weakness? It's a telling point.
It really is. Okay, another example. Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's sons. They were priests serving God, but they offered strange fire. What made their service strange and so fatally offensive?
Good question. They offered fire which he had not commanded them. That's the key. Their service came from their initiative, maybe their zeal, but not from God's specific instruction or Aaron's direction. Our source defines strange fire as serving without an order, serving outside the lines of obedience and delegated authority.
So they thought, hey, we're priests, we can offer fire. Not, has God told us to do this right now?
Exactly. They operated independently. It highlights a really serious point.
Yeah.
True service, acceptable service, is initiated by God and done under his authority. Anything else, no matter how good it looks, is strange. It originates from us, not him.
So God cares about the source and the authorization of our service, not just the act itself. That leads us to another family issue. Miriam and Aaron speaking against their own brother, Moses. What was going on there?
Well, the surface issue was Moses marrying a Cushite woman. But their complaint went deeper, didn't it? They asked, hath Jehovah indeed spoken only with Moses? Hath he not spoken also with us?
So they were challenging his unique position.
Yes, they were basically saying, hey, God talks to us too. Why is Moses so special? They were questioning God's specific delegation of authority to Moses based on, a family or perhaps even a racial pretext.
And God's response?
God heard it, and he was not pleased. Miriam was immediately struck with leprosy. It was direct divine discipline. The message was clear. Speaking against God's chosen representative, Moses was tantamount to speaking against God. Spiritual authority comes from God's choice, not human status or even relationship.
Wow, leprosy, that's immediate. Okay, then there's the big one. Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. This was a full-scale collective rebellion. What was their argument against Moses and Aaron?
Korah, who was a Levite himself, gathered Dathan, Abiram, and 250 prominent leaders. Their charge against Moses and Aaron was, you take too much upon yourselves. All the congregation are holy, every one of them. Why then do you lift yourselves up above Jehovah's assembly?
So their logic was, we're all holy, therefore you have no special authority.
Pretty much. It sounds almost democratic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it completely ignored God's specific appointment. Moses, interestingly, didn't argue back. He fell on his face, took it to God.
And God's response this time?
Even more dramatic. God declared he would show whom he had chosen. Then the earth literally opened up and swallowed Korah, Dathan, Abram, and their families. And fire consumed the 250 leaders who offered incense with them.
Goodness.
It was a terrifying demonstration that rejecting God's delegated authority is rejecting God. You can't separate the two. You can't say, I respect God, but not the person he put in charge. Rebellion, the source stresses, is truly a hellish principle.
These stories are definitely sobering. They paint a stark picture of the consequences of rebellion. But what about the positive side? What does true submission look like, especially when the authority figure is less than perfect? David and Saul seem key here.
Absolutely. David's situation was incredible. He was already anointed king by God. Saul, the current king, was rejected by God and actively hunting David down, trying to kill him.
Right, a terrible situation.
Yet David had not one, but two clear chances to kill Saul and take the throne. Easy opportunities. But he refused. He said, Jehovah forbid that I should do this thing unto my Lord, Jehovah's anointed.
Even though Saul was acting wrongly and David was technically the rightful king.
Exactly. He even felt guilty just cutting off a corner of Saul's robe. David understood something profound. He was subject to the anointing, the God-ordained position, even on a man who had failed. He wouldn't usurp God's timing or methods. He chose self-denial and submission to God's authority over his own rights or perceived destiny.
That's remarkable, valuing God's established authority above personal safety, justice, or even, you could argue, fulfilling God's promise faster.
It's a very high standard. It shows a deep, deep knowledge of how God's authority works.
So David is a powerful human example, but as we touched on earlier, the ultimate model is Christ himself. What more does the source say about his obedience? What makes it the absolute pinnacle?
Well, Philippians 2 is key here. Christ, who existed in the form of God, didn't cling to that equality. He emptied himself. He took the form of a servant, became human, and then humbled himself, becoming obedient even unto death, yea, the death of the cross.
So the emptying was part of the obedience.
Absolutely. For him, who was God, to choose the position of absolute obedience, setting aside his divine rights and power. Our source argues this was a far greater act than even creating the universe. It's
Whoa.
staggering. He actually learned obedience through suffering, the writer to the Hebrews says. And through that perfect obedience, he became the source of salvation for all who obey him. His obedience was total, without a hint of self-will.
It puts our own struggles with obedience into perspective, doesn't it? That true authority actually flows from that kind of perfect obedience. Okay, so this isn't just ancient history or theology, it's practical. The source says rebellion shows up in three key areas for us: words, reasons, and thoughts. Let's break those down, starting with words.
Right. It's simple but profound. Out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. Rebellious words are often the first sign of a rebellious heart-finding expression.
Like Ham talking about Noah.
Exactly. Or Eve adding that little bit, neither shall ye touch it, to God's command. Or Miriam and Aaron muttering, has God only spoken through Moses? These weren't just casual remarks. They were verbalizations of an inward questioning or rejection of authority. And the source warns that actually saying the rebellious thing causes a greater loss of power than just thinking it. It gives it form, influence.
Oof. That makes you think about gossip, or complaining about leaders, or even just arguing against instructions, doesn't it? How careful are we really with our words about authority?
It's a constant challenge.
Yeah.
And often those words spring from the next area, our reasons.
Reasons. You mean like our logic, our arguments?
Precisely. Think about Korah and his group. They had their reasons for challenging Moses, right? We're stuck in the wilderness, it's barren, we're all holy, so why are you guys in charge? They had a logical case from their perspective.
Yeah, you can almost see their point if you ignore God's appointment.
And that's the danger. The source says quite bluntly, reason is the first cause of rebellion. It argues that to truly follow God, our independent human reasoning sometimes needs to be put out, spiritually speaking. It even uses Paul's physical blinding on the Damascus Road as a type of this.
Wow, put out! That sounds drastic.
It means not letting our logic be the ultimate arbiter when it clashes with God's revealed will or authority. God doesn't usually debate with us. His ultimate reason is often just, I am the Lord. The source argues we're either living under God's authority or under our own reasoning. We can't consistently do both. It's one principle or the other, God's way or the way that seems right to us.
That is deeply challenging, especially today when we value critical thinking so highly. It's not saying don't think, but don't let your thinking usurp God's authority.
Exactly. It's about the hierarchy. And the deepest level, the root, is our thoughts.
Okay, so words come from reasons, and reasons come from thoughts.
That's the progression. Thought is the seedbed. Our reasonings build strongholds around these rebellious thoughts. That's why Paul in 2 Corinthians 10 talks about warfare. Overthrowing strongholds, overthrowing reasonings, and leading captive every thought into the obedience of Christ.
Every thought, that's the battleground.
It really is. Our minds, with all their clever devices and opinions, are where the resistance often starts. Think back. Saul was rejected because of his thought about how best to use the Amalekites' livestock. Nadab and Abihu acted on their thought about offering fire. Uzzah died because David used his thought in ox cart instead of God's method for the ark. The goal described as full deliverance, where our very thoughts are recaptured by God, brought into alignment with Christ's obedience, so we stop thinking and acting independently of him.
Recaptured by God. Okay, this is painting a very clear picture of what's required from those under authority. But what about the other side? What about the people God actually appoints as delegated authorities? What makes someone fit for that role according to this source?
That's crucial too. It's not just about position, it's about qualification. The source lists three main requirements, beyond just knowing authority themselves. First, revelation. They need to know deep down that the authority isn't theirs, it's God's, and they're just representing it. They need to know God's will and speak from that, not their own ideas. Moses is the example God spoke mouth to mouth with him. If someone in authority is always seeking recognition for themselves, it's often a sign the authority isn't purely from God.
Okay, so knowing it's not about them, what's second?
Second, denial of self. God can't really use someone who's full of their own opinions, their own clever plans, their own ego. They need to be, as the source puts it, completely broken by God in that sense. Their natural strengths, their personal agendas have to be dealt with.
Not having no thoughts, but having them submitted.
Exactly. Having them recaptured by God, as we just discussed. Being an empty channel for his will, not their own. And third, sanctification. Being set apart. Think of the priests in the Old Testament, like Aaron. Strict rules about what they could drink, how they mourned, even their appearance. This wasn't arbitrary. It signified being separated from the common, dedicated wholly to God.
So sacrificing personal preferences or even normal things for the sake of representing God purely.
Yes. The higher the position of authority, the source suggests, the stricter the requirement for this kind of sanctification, this separation unto God. Authority rests on this holiness, this being set apart for God.
Revelation, denial of self, sanctification. That's quite a list. And what's the ultimate basis for this God-given authority? The source uses that striking image of Aaron's rod, right?
Yes. Number 17. After Korah's rebellion, God settles the leadership question decisively. He has each tribe bring a dead wooden rod. They put them in the tabernacle overnight.
An Aaron's rod.
Aaron's rod, representing the priestly line God chose, didn't just sit there. It miraculously sprouted, budded, blossomed, and even bore ripe almonds overnight from a dead stick.
Wow. Life out of death.
Precisely. That's the basis of true spiritual authority according to the source. Resurrection life. Something that comes from God, not from natural ability, human effort, or popular vote. It's the life that only God can give. It keeps the person humble, too, because they know anything dead, any failure, that's from me. But anything alive, any fruit, that's purely from God. Authority flows from that resurrection power, not from the person themselves.
That really underscores the seriousness of it all. It's God's authority, flowing through resurrection life, delegated to sectified, self-denying people who have revelation, which makes misuse of that authority incredibly serious. What happens when even someone like Moses messes up in representing God? The Meribah incident.
Yes, Numbers 20, it's a stark warning. The people are grumbling, thirsty again. God tells Moses clear instructions, speak to the rock and it will yield water. Simple grace.
But Moses doesn't just speak to it, does he?
No. He's provoked. He calls the people rebels, acting in his own anger, and then he strikes the rock twice with his staff. Now, water still comes out. God provides.
Now there's a consequence.
A huge one. God says to Moses and Aaron, because you believe not in me, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land.
Just for that one act after everything Moses did.
Yes, because he misrepresented God's character at a crucial moment. He showed anger and judgment, striking, when God intended to show grace, speaking. God holds his representatives to a higher standard. They failed to sanctify him, to represent him accurately. And so both Moses and Aaron were barred from the promised land. It shows that authority is tied to ministry, to accurately representing God. When that representation fails, the authority to lead further can be withdrawn. It's a heavy responsibility.
That is incredibly sobering.
Okay, this brings up a critical practical question for everyone listening. We're told to obey authority. But what if a human authority, a boss, a leader, even a government, tells us to do something that clearly goes against God's direct command? Is obedience still absolute then?
That's probably the most common and difficult question, isn't it? And the source offers a very important nuance here. Submission is absolute, but obedience is relative.
Okay, break that down. Submission absolute, obedience relative.
It means our attitude towards the God-ordained institution or position of authority should remain one of respect and submission. We don't rebel against the structure itself. However, a specific act of obedience might have to yield to God's higher command if there's a direct conflict.
Can you give examples?
The Bible is full of them, actually. The Hebrew midwives disobeying Pharaoh's order to kill the baby boys. Daniel praying despite the king's decree. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refusing to bow to the idol. Joseph taking Jesus and fleeing Herod's command. Peter and the apostles saying, we must obey God rather than men. Right, so in those cases, they didn't obey the specific ungodly command.
Correct. But notice, they generally submitted to the consequences imposed by that earthly authority. Daniel went to the lion's den, his friends to the furnace, Peter to prison. They didn't lead an armed revolt against the king. They disobeyed the specific order while maintaining submission to the governing structure's right to judge them.
Ah, that's a key distinction. Disobey the unlawful order, but submit to the consequences.
Yes. Someone who has truly encountered God's authority, the source suggests, will naturally try to find and respect authority everywhere. But they'll also have a keen sensitivity to lawlessness and rebellion, knowing when a human command crosses the line into direct opposition to God. It requires discernment.
That distinction is incredibly helpful for navigating complex situations today. Okay, bringing this all together then. What does this deep dive mean for us, maybe particularly within our faith communities, within the church? What's the big takeaway for someone wanting to live this out?
While connecting all these threads, the source sees God's authority finding its fullest intended expression within the body of Christ, the church, not as some kind of rigid external hierarchy necessarily, but ideally as a living organism. Think of a healthy body. The limbs move naturally, instinctively, in response to the head. There's no argument, no forced compliance. It's a heartfelt, inherent obedience. That's the picture.
So the goal is for us, collectively as the church, to obey Christ as seamlessly as Christ obeys the Father.
That's the ultimate vision presented. The church is meant to be the place where God's authority is learned, practiced, and demonstrated to the world. It's seen as the pivot point, the vanguard, for God establishing his rightful rule, his kingdom on earth. And it boils down to this. If we, individually and collectively, learn true obedience, if that spirit of rebellion is dealt with in our words, our reasons, our thoughts, then God's will, his authority, can flow unhindered through us. Our usefulness to him is directly proportional to the obedience we learn.
Wow. So our personal obedience has potentially cosmic implications. This deep dive has certainly given us a lot to think about: the nature of authority, the subtle ways rebellion creeps in, the high calling of both obedience and delegated leadership. It really drives home that this isn't just some side issue, is it? It's absolutely central. So the question for you listening right now isn't really if you'll encounter authority, because as we've seen, it's woven into the fabric of reality by God. The real question is, how will you respond? Will you aim for that heart of submission like David showed, even towards a flawed leader? Will you prioritize God's will above your own reasoning like Christ modeled? And will you actively seek to bring your words, your reasons, and especially your thoughts into alignment with his obedience? And maybe here's a final thought to chew on. What if the journey to real spiritual impact isn't about accumulating more personal influence or power, but about becoming profoundly, deeply obedient? Because perhaps it's only through that kind of yieldedness that God's true authority can flow through us to genuinely change things, something to reflect on. We encourage you to observe where God's authority is present in your life this week and how you're responding to it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep growing.